Hi, I'm Dr. Nicole Jenkins. I'm a Senior Research Officer at the Florey Institute and co-founder and CEO of Phoebe Technologies.
My name is Lauren Ersich. I am a PhD candidate in the Addiction Neuroscience Lab, working with Dr. Lee Walker and Professor Andrew Lawrence.
My name is Dr. Francesca Alves. I'm an early career researcher in the Translational Neurodegeneration group. So our research in Alzheimer's disease has really uncovered an energy dysregulation. We believe this research can be translated into ME/CFS. The main cohort of people that have this illness are women, a staggering amount of 75%. We do know that it's misunderstood. There's a lot of stigma associated with it. And so we hope this research, which is led by women, will really be able to shed light and remove the stigma and hopefully create novel therapeutics.
For so long, research has been exclusively conducted in males and male models. Our research in addiction is understanding how addiction affects the female brain, using that understanding of the underlying biology to hopefully then create more targeted therapies.
So at Phoebe Technologies, our aim is to revolutionise the diagnosis and management of iron disorders using some really exciting new quantum technology. Iron disorders disproportionately affect women. In Australia, it's 1 in 5 women. I've been working in the lab on the importance of iron in ageing and neurodegeneration for a number of years, but I also had an iron disorder. It took 7 years for me to be correctly diagnosed and treated. So it's something that we're really passionate about at Phoebe, to try and solve this problem. We all start science primarily for the same reason. We're driven by curiosity initially, but I've seen across the years that we lose a lot of women.
Starting a PhD approximately like 6 years ago, I had 4 male group leaders as supervisors. I had a male chair, I had a male head of department. And what I really found is that there was this gap in a career trajectory where women almost seem to drop off at a certain stage in their career.
So at the early career stages, we have around 50%, a really good gender balance, but by the time you get to associate professor and professor, it's really small.
There's so much power in seeing your identity represented in leadership, particularly in science. It was once that I saw my identity in her leadership as a woman and a queer woman. That's when I've really grown as a scientist, a leader, into my research and my career as well.
In the future, I hope that a woman that starts her PhD can see a woman at every stage in the career trajectory. She can see that a woman that's a professor is not an exception, it's a norm, and that there's no limitations in their decisions of their career and life outside of science, that they can occur simultaneously.
What I see is fantastic science, great grantsmanship, people really worthy of funding. There is amazing science that could be being done across the board, particularly by women, that's just missing out. And so I really would love to see more money in the system, either through philanthropic donations or through improved grant funding. We are driven by that passion to make the world a better place. That's really the driving force behind everything that we do.
Happy International Women's Day.
Happy International Women's Day.
Happy International Women's Day.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Florey. We are here for International Women's Day, and we are also launching a very exciting program that we'll hear about soon, the Levelling Up program. I'm Professor Peter van Wijngaarden, and I'm Executive Director of the Florey, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you. I also extend that welcome to people who are joining us on the live stream, and we are grateful that you could attend as well. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners on the lands on which we meet today, the Kulin Nation, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I also extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that we have with us today. So today's event is one of a constellation of International Women's Day events in the Parkville precinct, and we're really delighted and thrilled that you have chosen to join us today. So that very powerful introductory video that we've just watched sets the tone for today's event. It highlights that we need to do a lot more to enable women researchers to flourish at all career stages. So it's in that vein that we're very excited to be launching the Levelling Up program. We expect that this will be a transformational program that enables targeted professional development for women researchers at the Florey. Levelling Up has been generously funded by Naomi Milgrom AC, whose visionary leadership in business and philanthropy is directly aligned with the goals of the program. We're also in for a real treat as we have the chance to learn from a panel of exceptional women, each leaders in their own fields. The panel will be moderated by another tremendous leader, Georgia Brown, our Head of Communications and Engagement at the Florey. So it's now my great pleasure to welcome Associate Professor Snezana Milajevic, molecular neuroscientist, ion channel physiologist, group head, and chair of the Equity and Science Committee. Please welcome Snezana.
Okay, well, thank you, Peter, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy to be here and introduce to you the Levelling Up program. I am talking to you on behalf of EQUIS, our Equity in Science Committee, which has been spearheading the equity, diversity and inclusion topics at the Florey for more than a decade. You see there some of the achievements in this 10 to 13 years, I think, that are listed, and I do want to emphasize a few. The committee did contribute to policies and strategies. It did provide some rebound grants after COVID pandemics. It did also establish mentoring program at the Florey, which was then taken over by the Institute. So there is a lot of activity there. And we are also really proud that we have re-established connections with our colleagues in other EDI committees within the precinct to engage in this week leading up to the International Women's Day. For us, everything started already last Friday when we organized first ever Florey networking event for women scientists. The reason being that we actually never really met in one room, but also because we wanted to discuss topics like networking, mentoring, and promotion. And some of the ideas that came up from that were also embedded in our program. This is the key graphics we looked into last Friday and we looked into when we were setting up the Levelling Up program. And for those who don't really understand the alphabetics here, academics level go from A to E. E is full professorship, and A is when you enter your postdoc after graduation. So you see that at the start in biomedical research, the numbers are actually on the side of women, but that there is a steep drop between levels B and C. C is the level where you already have to go for promotion. So this is why we call this a promotion program, because we think there is something that can be done there. You do see that there was a slight shift there. So between 2019 and 2024, we did a bit of improvement, but this big gap on senior academic levels is still there. I kind of tend to see this, I don't know if you would agree with me, it's like a hungry crocodile. So we would want to close the mouth. Obviously, the gap is not only typical for Florey. It is there across institutions, across universities. I did steal these graphs from the NHMRC analysis when they initiated the investigator grant program, and you see that more early career levels were predominantly applied for by women, but then towards the senior or L3 level, we had a drop to 20%. They have, in the meantime, established special measures to counteract this, and we hope to see that those measures and the funding will reflect also in what we are seeing at the institute level. So what are the barriers that we need to conquer in order to shut the mouth of the hungry crocodile? I think there will be a lot of discussion, I guess, about that also in our panel, but some of those are listed here. Some of those we discussed last week. We obviously know that a lot is linked to the career interruptions, that women are more taking than men. There is unconscious bias And then there is this, that few women apply for promotion, and there are studies that show that women will only apply for promotion if they fulfill 100% of requirements, whereas men will apply if they have some. So there is also one thing that we discussed last week, which we kind of found interesting because it was really easy to recognize, the hidden workload. Because there are fewer senior women, they get more tasks to do that are more administrative tasks, more mentoring tasks, they're sitting on more committees, and that is something that maybe we can resolve. We also discussed lack of networking. For some reason, women are not so prone to making and building networks, and that is also something that the program will address. So what I'm presenting to you today is kind of grassroots-led leveling up program that was created because we got the generous contribution of Naomi Milgrom, as Peter just said, and we're really grateful for that. The idea of the program is to provide mentorship and skills and strategic support so that more women will go for the promotion, and that will then give us more women in leadership positions. The components of the program are listed here. We thought it would be nice to have something that is really tailored to each person or each woman. So once you are in a process or in a time where you should go for your promotion, you could apply for the program, and you will get tailored strategies for your how you can achieve that faster. So that will include getting some skills up, so like level up your skills, but also getting a strategic approach to when to go for promotion, what is the thing that is missing for your promotion success. We will also provide financial assistance for some of the things listed on the slide, trainings and travel and childcare when you're traveling for conferences, as well as advice on mentorship and provide networking opportunities. And no program is good without accountability, but I think the special thing here will be that we will follow up with our successful applicants regularly to see if there are any changes or updates that need to be made in their specially tailored promotions program. What we hope is to achieve more women in senior positions, to have higher career satisfaction and retention of women at the Institute, also to improve the mentoring and networking and increase leadership representation. You see also our key metrics there, but basically we want more women to go for promotion and get promoted, and we also want more of them to have leadership roles. In the future, this is a 3-year program at this stage. We will be, of course, reevaluating and taking on board the participants' feedback, so we hope that there is a potential to expand this. So I'm really thrilled to announce that the applications for the Leveling Up program are opening soon. On the 17th of March, we will communicate the details internally, and all women at the Institute are invited to apply if they are level B or above and are planning to go for promotion in next year, 2 or 3. I think this aligns perfectly with this year's International Women's Day theme, which is accelerate action. So we are accelerating our action by launching this program. But I would just like to end up on a kind of more personal note. I thought, well, maybe it's International Women's Day. Let me think about why am I standing here? And I think all of us sometimes do that. Like, was there a moment in my life that actually determined where I'm today? And for me, that moment was 137 minutes long, I checked. It was this movie called Life Story, or the race for the double helix from late 80s, that actually presented not only the mesmerizing story of DNA discovery, which led me to study molecular biology and do biomedical research, but also in shadow a sad and terrible story about how Rosalind Franklin was disregarded and her findings disrespected. And I think that's probably what determined that I'm standing here and trying to advocate that the story of Rosalind Franklin, and by the way, if you don't remember, please do check that, that it's not forgotten and also that it never repeats. And in that regard, happy International Women's Day.
Thank you, Snezana. I'm sure you'll agree that's all a fantastic initiative, and I'm really grateful to you and to other members of the Equity and Science Committee for the tremendous thought and effort that has gone into this. And, it's something that I really personally applaud. I'd also like to reiterate our thanks to Naomi Milgrom AC, whose generosity has made this possible. So we really look forward to seeing the mouth of the hungry crocodile closing. So it's now my great pleasure to welcome my colleague, Georgia Brown, to introduce our panellists. Thanks, Georgia.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming along today. I have been so excited about hosting this panel this afternoon. I really hoped that I wouldn't go into labour beforehand. And let's hope I hold on to that for the next 45 minutes, because otherwise it could get quite messy. So I know that we have a spread of people here from the medical research sector, from the health sector, people who are just really interested in our sector as well. And we really wanted to put together a panel that was rich in diverse experiences that we can all draw from, and I'm really pleased to see that come to fruition today. So it's my privilege to introduce our panellists. We'll start with you, Lauren. Professor Lauren Ayton AM is a decorated clinical researcher with over 15 years experience working in ophthalmic medical devices and vision restoration. She was recently appointed as Associate Dean of Innovation and Enterprise within the Faculty of Medicine, Dentistry and Health Sciences. Congrats. Yeah, we'll need an applause there. She holds a joint appointment as Professor at the University of Melbourne and the Centre for Eye Research Australia, and has experience working in the industry over in the US, a startup called Bionic Eye Technologies, which I'm really interested in going into that and in the second or third question. So welcome, Lauren. Let's give it a round of applause. Do a round of applause for each other. Our next panellist is Dr. Ranjana Srivastava, OAM. Ranjana is a practicing oncologist of over 2 decades, award-winning writer, broadcaster, Fulbright scholar. As one of Australia's most respected voices, her book, A Better Death, bravely and intelligently examines how we can have important conversations about our mortality with those that we love. We've brought that up on the screen there. Guardian columnist of 14 years, so another dual career that we'll be exploring during the panel. So yeah, welcome, Ranjana. And the Honourable Gabrielle Upton will feel familiar to many of you here in the audience today because she is one of our Florey board directors who generously offers her time and 30 years of combined experience as a lawyer, a banker, government minister to the Florey on a regular basis through that forum. So we're incredibly lucky to benefit from that as an organisation. Gabrielle's ministerial appointments included New South Wales Attorney General, Minister for the Environment, for Family and Community Services, and for sport. She's operated at the top levels of the university sector as Deputy Chancellor of University of New South Wales. And alongside her position at the Florey, she is also non-exec director at Netball Australia and O'Connell Street Associates. So welcome, Gabrielle. And we're nearly there. The Honourable Jaala Pulford, another name that will feel very familiar to you all, as she has confessed herself that she cannot stay away from the Parkville precinct. Jaala has held 8 ministerial positions in Victorian government, including as the first woman to serve as the state's agriculture minister. She's currently the chair of MTP Connect, Australia's life sciences accelerator, chair of the Children's Cancer Foundation, a non-executive director at CYBAN, and Vice-Chancellor's Fellow at the University of Melbourne. Welcome, Jaala. So, all accomplished leaders, and I'd like to invite you all to think about the questions that you'd like to ask of these fabulous leaders, because there will be some time at the end for those questions. So I'd like to start off with thinking about career progression and thinking about work environments. Work environments career progression can depend so much on the environment that we're in. Whether that's seeing women at every stage of the career, like Francesca and Lauren were talking about in the video, or whether it's things like, more tangible things like flexible working policies. Lauren, you've climbed the ladder in academia, and that's not easy, particularly after level C, if you've seen that hungry crocodile. How did you find that growth and environment as you progressed through the ranks?
Yeah, thank you. Look, I love the hungry the crocodile. I've heard it talked about the scissor plot before as well, and unfortunately it is real and it's not going away, and it's a real challenge, I think, to how we support women at that mid-career stage when people do tend to drop off. I think what really spoke to me in that video was the idea of seeing, women in leadership. I was incredibly blessed to have really strong women leaders around me all the way through my career, and so I could see, that there were pathways. But unfortunately, it is a big drop, and I think a big challenge with it is actually the way that our academic system is set up with promotions, because when you go from C to D, so for those of you who are not academics in the room, you have to do certain things like go to international conferences and collaborate with people in different areas and publish lots and speak lots, and all of these things take time. And if you have other commitments outside of work, it can be really, really challenging. And much as I would love to see every single family 50-50 childcare responsibilities, it doesn't necessarily happen. So I think that lines up, the promotion stage lines up with an age that women are at, which is really a lot going on in your life, and that can make it really hard to apply for promotion.
And did you find that changed when you went into industry? You obviously, I would love you to talk about your experience in the US, because not only is it a completely different sector, different country, presumably your family came along for the ride as well. Yep. So maybe did that change things for you?
Absolutely, it was a beautiful segue in terms of just how much happens at that stage of your life. I think there was a lot. I had a 1-year-old. We moved our whole lives across to the US, and the startup culture is very, very different. For any of you that have worked in a startup, it's much faster. It's a very different kind of atmosphere. One of the beautiful things I loved is that the framework wasn't so strict, So for me to push forward in the startup, I didn't have particular, KPIs. I didn't have to have a certain number of papers before I could go further in the startup. But the flip side of that was that the culture in the startup I was in, and this varies from place to place, but it was very engineering heavy. It was very male oriented. So I was the first female employee. To give you an idea, when I started, our maternity and paternity guidelines were that if you had a baby, you got 3 days off. And I read that and went, I can guarantee that you're not back at work after 3 days. You're potentially not off the couch in 3 days. So, it was very interesting for me as a woman going in and going, we need to be more equitable about how we treat our employees as a start. But it was, interesting in the culture of that startup. While it was more flexible and easier to push ahead, there were some challenges like that. Yeah,
that's great. 3 days, wow, that's crazy.
I'm pretty sure the Florey won't make you do that.
I'm pretty sure.
Pete's not going to.
There's a bit of slack there. Ranjana, from a clinical environment perspective, I can't imagine there's too much flexibility. Can you talk us through how you managed a fairly rigid work environment and how you navigated that through the rungs of your career?
Yeah, so thank you and welcome everyone. It's lovely to be here. So in clinical medicine, I think things tend to be a little bit different in that women tend to progress along and become specialists like I did. But I think that's where then, a bit like Lauren said, the path of specialization or after you specialize kind of coincides and dovetails with your childbearing years, with commitments to other things. And I remember thinking throughout my 30s, and people who had my male co-residents were sort of climbing up and establishing practices and doing really well and going to international conferences. And I remember thinking often that I was being left behind, and I sort of felt I started in the same place as them. I was as good as them. They were as good as me, but there was this definitely a parting of ways where people established themselves, if they were men, whether they were in research positions, academia or clinicians, whereas, a lot of my time was spent working part-time and sort of fitting in work around children and family, and that was a choice I made. And I think, we often hear about this whole issue of can women have it all, etc., etc. I guess what I've come to realize sort of 20 years later, you can probably have it all, just not at the same time. And so I very much didn't have it what my male colleagues did back then, and it has just been a slower progression. We can talk about my interesting career, which is probably a consequence also of feeling that I couldn't have the full bore career that I had perhaps imagined myself as having when I was a medical student. Peter and I went to medical school together, so shout out.
Thank you, Ranjana. And Gabrielle, you've worked in law, in banking. There's a little button on the bottom there if you want people to hear you, which we do. Very male-dominated environments. Probably the norm for you, I'd assume. Male-dominated environments would probably be the norm for you, given your career trajectory, being in government, being in law, being in banking. How did you adapt to that?
Good question. And the first examination I passed by using your microphone, so thank you very much for that. So, yes, I think that is the case. Just some reflections, because Jaala and I will have, I'm sure, be in heated agreement around our roles in government and what challenges that posed. But similarly, I worked in the US. I did an MBA there and I worked in banking. And that was back in the last century. So times have changed, definitely in that there are better policies. I think if I could move to maybe something that's a little bit sharp or maybe controversial, I think sometimes we do women a disservice because we don't call out exactly what the job will require. So we don't call out the secrets and we don't call out the job description early enough for women to understand what the next role might require of them. So, you know, as it was when I grew up, you do the job, you do it well, you think that executing well will buy you the promotion. But there's a lot of other things that go with promotion. And so if I take the example of working in a law firm, I looked at the stats that came out yesterday with the federal agency releasing its sense of where women are in various professions. And the stats there probably not much better than when I first had my job out of law school as a lawyer in a large law firm. About 70% of women are salaried workers in law firms, and that includes administrative roles as much as solicitors, and 30% are partners. So there's a gap there in the same way as it's represented here with the hungry crocodile, alligator, whatever. So you kind of see that. So I suppose the first thing is to say, yes, it is the same in other areas which I've worked. But coming back to the point that I just want to leave provocatively out there, I think what I do when people say, you know, I want to do this or I want to do that, women in particular, that we're talking about today, I actually say, well, look, this is what, in my assessment, that next step requires of you. And it does involve more external affairs and relations. It does involve the soft skills. Clearly, you've acquitted your technical competency, so that is there. You've been, you know, you've made level B, for example, or is it level D? Yes. Yeah, you made level D, but you haven't. You're plotting to go beyond level C. To actually call that out and say, well, this is what that job entails. And so I think it's really important. And I honour this program here that we call out what are the things that then make that next step of success possible. And the last thing I'd say, in Parliament and in politics where some of the issues are pervasive as well, before I finished up in my role 2 years ago, I did a study tour and it was based around how would you acquit new women MPs into Parliament the best you could for their roles. And going world round, there actually aren't many examples of how you help women in those roles do the best they can when they're first in Parliament. Because it involves another set of skills that, honestly, in Parliament, there's nothing that really equipped me outside that to succeed in that role. But it is actually about practical skills, but it is saying this is what it will require to succeed, but we're going to help you, we're going to be there. And fellowship, I think, is a part of that. We can talk about that later.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gabrielle. And Jaala, do you relate to that? Do you see that maybe as a woman operating those really senior levels of government, were you equipped with the skills at the beginning to see you through, or how did you find that?
I think there's a number of really interesting observations we've heard, including the inherent structural flaw that exists in academia and in research and in politics and in all manner of spots in the private sector, and corporate law is sort of well known for being a hotspot for gender inequality. So I think so. I really did like Gabrielle's description of, as both systems but also expectations of what is actually required. I'm not sure that there's much that can prepare a person for the next role short of being in it. And so one of the challenges I think we all have as supporters and promoters of women trying to make their way in the world is to encourage them to not wait until they are perfect for the role, because everybody else is faking it too. And so I think what I have learnt, and it really took me 12 years in the union movement, 16 years in Parliament, 8 years in Cabinet to realise, and only really as I was leaving, I thought, I reckon everybody else has got this terribly crippling imposter syndrome too. Would have been really good information in 1994, but here we are. I am passing it on to you now.
I love that. We've all had some sort of career duality in your career paths. I wonder whether, Ranjana, we can start with you, because yours is potentially more diverse than most. Obviously, being an oncologist, that takes, years and years of training and experience, but then you just decided to write a book and become a columnist. I know you're passionate about doctor-patient communication, and that probably played a role, but what else spurred that on to branch out in that way?
Thank you. I'll try to keep it short because I want to hear from everybody else too. So I think ever since I became an oncologist, I always felt that I was sort of bumping into human stories, and I was very interested in the art of medicine from the very beginning, because I think so much of medicine is about empathy and compassion and relationship building. Anybody, and probably everybody in the room, has either seen a doctor or had a relative, and who are the doctors you remember? The doctors who were good to you, who had good bedside manner. Because as far as I'm concerned, if you are practicing in this country, our technical skills are up to scratch. So it wasn't until, and this goes back to the point of seeing something different. So I had never met a doctor who wrote and published. And so I thought, well, I need to be a regular doctor, because a regular oncologist sees patients, treats cancer. But here was this itch that I had, and I had no way of satisfying that itch until, and this speaks to doing different things in your career sometimes and taking a step laterally. I applied for a Fulbright scholarship, sort of to take a year out of medicine and study medical ethics at the University of Chicago. I wanted to study about the ethics of how oncologists disclose sensitive information, and especially information about a terminal diagnosis to patients, because as many people will know, it is not done particularly well. So this is how I won a Fulbright. But when I went to Chicago, that Fulbright, as many researchers will know, your projects can fall apart fairly quickly. And then what happened, for the first time in my life, I met doctors who wrote. And they were really good doctors. They weren't sort of either or, they were both. And so all of a sudden, I had these mentors, I had these people who were excellent doctors and who were excellent writers. And for the first time, so the light bulb went off, going, I can do this too. And then I think the generosity of good mentors is that they say, you can do this too. And I distinctly remember this neonatologist who unfortunately died prematurely said to me, Ranjana, you have a book in you. And I went, this is the first time that someone has said to me, beyond my parents, you have a book in you. And it gave me wings. And subsequently, This Better Death is my 7th book. I came back and I was so just filled with the joy that someone believed in me. And that's the power of great mentorship. And somewhere along the line, I started writing for The Guardian again. I distinctly remember when I started writing, a couple of doctors said to me, so are you going to be an oncologist or a writer? And again, I got this whole complex insecurity, really, about what was I doing with my career, what was I doing with my life after all this training. Did I not want to be like the top oncologist in town with a 3-month waiting list? And I kept examining myself and going, but that's not me. But it's really difficult to break out of that mold if that's all you see. So I made a very deliberate attempt then to associate with people who were different. And I think if there's one message I can give, in a diverse sort of audience, connect with different people who don't do what you do, because you never know where your next inspiration is going to come from. And I know that I'm not here today by dint of being an oncologist, but because I write, and that's how you found me, and that's how I get to meet interesting people. So in a roundabout way, writing for The Guardian on sort of the doctor-patient relationship has opened a parallel career completely organically. I'm not a trained journalist. But it's wonderful, and it's allowed me to do public speaking and writing and build connections that ultimately, my final point is, I think all of this actually allows longevity of career. Any career after a certain stage, I think, becomes repetitive. There's a lot of pattern recognition. There's a lot of sameness. And in a long career, it's really nice to have variety, but you sort of have to go out there and get it for yourself, because it often isn't delivered to you. So I'll stop there.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ranjana. I think so many of us have a sort of programme to think that staying the course is going to deliver as, the ultimate career goal, but actually that variety can be, so compelling for, to draw you into your own career and to make you enjoy the everyday. I did just want to move on. I say this, I want to enter this question with, enthusiasm, but also, trepidation, given how pregnant I am. But we need to talk about kids, because I do think for a lot of people out there, that is a balancing act that isn't all that achievable. Balancing just being a present mum and having a thriving career. Jaala, you were pre-selected as parliamentary candidate when your kids were 1 and 4. A great opportunity, not so great time potentially. So, what were you thinking?
Yeah, special kind of crazy that is, hey. When I was elected to the Victorian Parliament in 2006, there'd been 67 women elected to the Parliament before me in more than 100 years. In my batch, we took that number up to 88. By the time I left, it was really a dramatically different story. But there really weren't that many women's toilets. This is where your laws are made, I mean, they fixed that up since in the time I was there. But, women were still a bit of a novelty. And the turnaround really was because the Labor Party decided that we would put quotas in place to overcome the kind of systemic considerations that actually exist in medical research and in universities. Things like, here, have a baby and be full-time and be judged by your last grant, even though, too bad, sorry, you had a baby last year, and see you in Boston. I mean, it's just... and it was the same in the Labor Party, and it was a long battle, and ultimately there were some targets set and quotas enforced. And then there was this big scary rule, which was the thing that made it work, which said that each round of pre-selections, if the targets aren't met, we're going to spill the lot. And so suddenly everybody was quite interested in making this work. And so I was really one of the people who was in the generation that were the first real beneficiaries of this. And so we sort of get to stand on the shoulders of people like Joan Kerner. But that is where you really started to see quite an uptick in numbers. Now, when I was kicking around in Young Labor with one of my friends, we were pretty much the only 2 girls in our crew, we would talk about, do you have the babies before or after, because the idea that you could do them simultaneously was such a foreign concept. Now it is not, but at the time I was elected, it was still pretty wild. People were, with rare exception, not having babies and being a member of Parliament simultaneously. Now it happens all the time. It happens in Canberra, it happens in the New South Wales Parliament, it happens, you know, in parliaments around the country. But it's very recent. And yeah, so there was, without kind of going into the slightly inelegant process of how people are pre-selected for Parliament, there was this sort of bunch of things that happened, and there was sort of a glimmer of an opportunity. And I remember, you know, talking to my mum, talking to my husband, talking to a couple of sort of friends and colleagues, and thinking, well, this could be my shot. And really, you know, knowing that if I passed up this shot, then there was every chance that this shot was never, ever, ever coming again. And so, you know, my husband, my mum, that well said, we'll just work it out. Like, try, you know, like nothing ventured, nothing gained. And so, yeah, they were 2 and 5 when I was elected. Yeah, and it was completely mad, but I wouldn't do it differently. And yes, there are now people who will go and be a member of Parliament and have a baby at the same time, indeed be a minister. People in the federal parliament who are in Canberra 20 weeks of the year. It can be done. It takes a lot of coordination and resourcing, but it takes that for everybody that has babies. Like, you know, earlier, Georgia, you were talking about, you know, what next month's going to be like and what the months after that are going to be like, and you never really know. But I think the moral of the story is when you're thinking about balancing family and career, there is no good time. So don't worry about looking for it.
Great, that's reassuring. Lauren, you are well and truly in it with an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old at the moment. Yeah, I mean, can you really have it all? Probably not. What are your observations on all of that and balancing that really full-on career?
Absolutely. Look, I love the comment before about, you know, you can have it all, but, you know, not necessarily all on the same day. Yeah. You know, and I think that's a really key thing for me. And look, it is always a juggle. And I was telling a story the other day to one of my friends. So I've got a 4-year-old daughter who's obsessed with fashion. She's absolutely going to be the next Paris Hilton at the moment. Lots of glitter, lots of diamantes. But she had a friend over and they were playing, and they said, her friend said, what does your mum do for work? And Emily, my daughter, said, she's a professor. And her friend said, what does that mean? And she's like, I don't know. She's like, she's on the computer and talks to people a lot, but she really loves it. And it melted my heart. And I just went, that's 100% what I want our kids to see. Like, our family is about raising our children that they can be anything they want, and I want them to see that in both parents as well. So that's sort of always what I come back to when I'm thinking about how do we juggle it, who's doing kinder pick-up today, who's doing drop-off. Like, it's constantly a juggle, and I think talking about that is really important too. So with my team, we always talk about this, you know, I can't make that meeting, and I'm not going to make up an excuse. It's because my son's running 100 metres final at athletics and I want to be there. So being open about that is really important, and I think this has started to change recently. I feel like really powerful women that I work with and that I get blessed to have time with will now be open about the fact that, you know, actually I've got these life things happening as well, and I'm going to do an amazing presentation to these investors at 8 a.m. in the morning, and then I'm going to go do school drop-off. You know, so talking about the fact that we have to juggle actually makes it more normal.
That normalised process of, not making an excuse for it, not feeling, you know, not cowering as you're saying it. Yeah, I think that's really powerful. Angela,
I'm going to jump in very quickly because
absolutely.
You can't have an oncologist in the room without talking about legacy. So I spend a lot of time with, unfortunately, many of my patients are dying, many of my patients are at the end of life. And, you know, even to a super smart group of academics and researchers like you, I will say no one ever says, I regret not having done that PhD. But people hang out for their kids to visit them. People hang out for their relatives to come. There is something very powerful about family, not just children, but family, relatives, relationships, and ties. And I think I've struggled a lot with This whole idea women have that if you have children, you are compromising your career to have children. It's sort of ingrained in us. And I'll be honest in saying it's something that I have often been resentful about, especially early when, as I said before, my male colleagues were climbing, presenting and conferences and headlining acts, and I'm like, I'm changing nappies. And it just felt a bit discordant with my image of myself, not the reality. And I think the older I grow, the more I realize that career kind of needs to be balanced in between really important priorities in life. And so now, as my children get older, their older one is at university around the corner here, but didn't want to come to this talk today, just saying. It is so important to put that in perspective. And I think being an oncologist especially forces me to look at that perspective. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for that perspective. It's really important. Before we get to questions, I want to talk about networks and mentorship and sponsorship. I know that's a really big topic for a lot of women in the room. Gabrielle, can you start us off? How do women build their own networks when we see, at very senior levels, going for a pint, going for a round of golf at the weekend comes so much more seamlessly to our male colleagues, potentially at the same level? How do we navigate that? How do we compete as women?
Great question, because this comes back to what are the practical tips. Just on that, I have to add something like Ranjana did, but I think life is not as planned as you would like it to be. To your point, we take the opportunities when they arise. I think the world's come a long way in many ways since the time I first had my kids. I fell pregnant unexpectedly with my son, who's now in his mid-20s, when I was at business school, and everybody else was 5 or 6 years younger than me. So this kind of baby thing was like, what has happened to you today? I've just noticed. I was really in a cohort of, again, young men who would be 25, and I was like 29. That made a big difference at that point. I think we've come a long way where you can call out I'm going and doing this, but then I'm going to do the school pickup. You would have had to hide that 20 years ago, or not do it, which comes back to your point, Ranjana, about the regrets you might have when you're a little older. But again, it comes back to the practical bit. So, celebrate the program today. Fantastic. Coming back to the work I did before I left Parliament and that program, it was about firstly telling people how it really was. This comes to calling out the truth of a job, what the real components of that are. It's not just you're excellent, because of course you're excellent. You wouldn't be there otherwise. It's all the other things. Creating fellowship amongst women like we are today, and there are a couple of honorary blokes in the audience, so thank you for coming along. It's actually wonderful that you're here, thank you, but creating a fellowship where women can talk about these issues so they don't feel they're completely alone, because they are scrambling around, principally, I think, even within much more evolved partnerships now in a family household. I still think women as a whole tend to bear that load a little longer, and some of that just comes by virtue of the fact you bear this baby, so there is a physical consequence and things that come from that. And I was just remarking to you today that, Georgia, the eyes are on your stomach at the moment. The minute you bear this baby, everyone's eyes will be on the baby, but yet the mother who's given birth and the health and other issues related to that still remain, and mothers can sometimes be the forgotten impact of having a baby. So I think there's a fellowship where you can explore those issues, and I think that's part of the program, the Levelling Up program today. The other thing is the skills. So developing the skills around what are not understood as being the strictly technical requirements of going into that next phase of your career or surviving in it. I don't think you can do the drinks at the pub and get home and do, the meal once a week or whatever it is, or being part of a family. So I honestly find the fact that we now have, and maybe it's even more pervasive post-COVID, the fact you can go and do a coffee with somebody seems to enable a much more flexible way in which you can do that networking. It's not confrontational because it doesn't bring alcohol into the mix. You don't have to worry how it might be misinterpreted, for example. So I use the coffee card all the time. The only thing I wish is that many more coffee places were open past 2 o'clock, because that would be much easier for me, but I know where they are in Sydney, which is where I'm from, so...
Jaala, any thoughts from you on building? I loved it when we talked about this before the panel. We sort of say, sod them, they can do what they want. Just create your own network. Is that sort of? Would you like to build on that? Maybe?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I had some wonderful mentors and role models, really exemplary leaders early in my career. They're all guys, like big, scary, powerful, union leader types, and. I feel very fortunate for that. Later, when I went into Parliament, I actually remember a conversation, somebody said, what's it like working in such a combative, male-dominated environment? It's like, this is hilarious. It's nothing like where I've been the last 12 years. This is kind of, genteel and full of women here by comparison, in the sort of 2 o'clock in the morning barking at each other in the upper house of the state parliament thing. But I think... Yeah, the networking comes a little less naturally to women. And I think when you and I were chatting the other day, Georgia, we were talking about when guys go out for lunch and it's a guy's lunch, they just think it's lunch. When the girls go out for lunch and it's just the girls, it's a girls' lunch. And there's all this kind of like weird apology about it. It's like, it's International Women's Day week, so like the girls going out for lunch. Whereas the boys go out for lunch because it's, like Thursday. And so it, like they don't notice they do it. I think it's much more innate. And probably because society wired us all a bit strangely, we're kind of reticent to do that. The other thing, and I say this with your boss here, is there is no productivity on earth like a woman who's just come back from maternity leave. Like, it is like superpower stuff. And so it's like, right, I've got to do 6,000 things today and I've got to get them all done by like 5:20 or my child will be locked into the creche overnight. And it's like, phew, and then I got to go home and do a whole other like a day's worth of stuff. And it's an extraordinary efficiency. I mean, it kind of fades off after a few years because you just, I think, get exhausted or whatever. But, I think creating spaces for people to be with their peers, and I love the coffee thing. It's like it's much better for more people than going to the pub or going to the races or going to the golf course or whatever. But it's to be encouraged, I think, and I think guys in guy-only spaces is a good thing too. And women in women's only spaces is a good thing, and the kind of mid-tier people who are all stuck under the glass ceiling together, that's a good thing, and the newest, youngest people, that's a good thing too, and of course the leaders, they're all already doing it.
Fantastic, thank you, Jaala. Right, we're going to open up for some questions. If we could have you wait for the mic, I would love to see anyone just state their name and who you'd like to direct your question to. We may also have some questions online as well. But yeah, over to you guys. Any questions? Stunned. Oh, Sarah. There was one in the front. Sarah.
My name's Sarah Gordon. Thank you so much for all the pearls of wisdom we've sort of had today. I'm going to ask for one more pearl of wisdom from each of you, and that's, is there a piece of advice that you've had from a woman, doesn't have to be a more senior colleague, that you've really taken to your core and has helped you through your career?
I was going to say, I'm happy to start with that one, and it actually very much follows on just about what we're talking about with honesty and how things have changed over time. So one of my first bosses, my mentor, Professor Robin Guymer, absolute guru. So she is number 3 in the world for age-related macular degeneration research, amazing person. And I remember her talking about how when she started her career, she would block off time in her diary because it was for life things, right? Things that needed to happen. She had to take her mum to the doctor, she'd take kids to school, things like that. And she would always name it something different. So she would make up a name about what the meeting was or something. And I remember her saying that she felt the time change in society when she didn't have to do that anymore. And she said she felt it was partly the time and where society had come to, but also her confidence got to the point when she was like, well, I can own this now. And I remember her saying to me, I want you to have that discovery earlier in your career. I don't want you to have to wait for so long to realise that everyone has a life outside of work. And so that was, for me, like I still get goosebumps remembering her telling me that, because it was really strong to go, well, this is what we all face. It doesn't matter what our family lives look like, what other things are happening. It's the reality.
Thank you. I'm going to cheat and tell you two things. The first one was very early on when I was a trainee doctor, a senior doctor said to me, if you want to have a career, make friends with childcare. I thought that was the best advice that I've carried through. I've never forgotten it. This whole notion of doing everything on your own and paid help. She's like, just make friends with it. That was the first one. The second one was actually from a man, from my brother, who once said in a birthday speech of his that really stayed with me, that the three things you need to have a happy or a fulfilled life. It's a quote from a philosopher. Something to do, someone to love, something to look forward to. And I try to think about all those three things as I go through life.
Gabrielle, did you have any great bits of advice that you'd like to share?
Well, speaking of children, choose your partner wisely. Because for the most important reason, it's a life journey with children. Someone who, when I went into politics, my husband never competed with me in the same way. I think having a relationship that's symbiotic where may not be, this could be anybody, it may not be your husband, but in my case it is. That is not a competitor professionally with you, where you can support one another. I think that's really important, because if you have at some level an understanding of we're not competing career-wise, we're in this together, your success is not my failure, that is a real centering piece in your life, that you, if you have it, it's blessed. Not everybody has it. It may come through not the relationship you're currently in, but another. So this is not a straightforward, 1 + 1 = 2. But that I would say, if I look back on my career, my husband has been very supportive of me because we're not competitors. He values what I do. I mean, he's not perfect, don't get me wrong. And I'm not perfect either. But we honour each other's career pursuits. He recognises a career and professional life is important to me. That we have had, to the point we've made before, I think life is not planned in the way we'd like to own up that it is. I mean, I look at the things that I've done. I would never have dreamed in my 20s that I would be where I am now. I couldn't have designed it. I haven't designed it. I think it's good to be vulnerable and share that with everybody. It's just like this door opened, or I went overseas there and I didn't know what I was going to do. I had no idea. But life throws you those things. You make the best of it, and sometimes it plays to a strength or a desire or an interest you have. And I think that's what happened when I went overseas. It enabled me to refocus and then eventually come back to politics, which I'm not sure would have happened if I had not lived overseas, to be frank. But yeah, a life partner I think is important, because when it comes to kids, it's very, very hard to do that by yourself if you're competing on that front together with your professional desires or aspirations. It's very hard.
Great advice, thank you. And Jaala, to finish us off.
Yes, I have a little story. When I was really quite new Member of Parliament, big parts of my electorate were experiencing the back end of the millennial drought. And there were a bunch of different programs. There's a little town in Western Victoria, Ararat, population of about 7,000 or 8,000 people. And there was a tiny, tiny breakfast program, a women's business breakfast program. And it was funded to the tune of about $10,000. And once a month for the year, there was this opportunity for people to come and be together. It was really sort of a community resilience mental health program. And anyway, they had a guest speaker come along one day, and somebody I knew a bit of a professional hero. And I thought, I'll tag along. The local council said, local members, you want to come along? Anyway, tagged along. And our guest speaker said to everyone, it's only a dozen or so, maybe 20 people in the room, what do you do? And who are you? And what do you, blah, 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 blah. And somebody said, and this happened all the time, I spent 4 years experiencing this as Agriculture Minister, I'm just the farmer's wife. I'm just the, I just do the finances for the business. Yeah, I just run things around here, but it's the word just. And anyway, the guest speaker just said, hang on a minute, do that again without that word. And it was so powerful. Now, fast forward quite some years, I think this is a year or two ago, I was at a dinner party with some of my Parkville buddies, because Parkville can't shake me. And I was sitting next to someone who, I kid you not, said, I'm just a brain surgeon. Unbelievable, right? If she's in the room, sorry, not sorry. And anyway, the guest speaker at this little drought event in Ararat, all those years ago, must have been 2007, she said, you must all promise to call this out every time you hear it for the rest of your lives. And it was kind of terrifying, and we all did. We all promised. And so I do it a lot. It kind of comes up most weeks and has done for the best part of 2 decades. So do not sell yourself short inside your own head. And if you catch anyone saying, I'm just the director of the Florey, or I'm, just a former Attorney General, or, I'm just an author and an oncologist, or I'm just a professor and working in startups and doing all sorts of amazing things, running 2 primary school aged children, just stop them and say, whoa, do that again. You didn't say that right. But it's because what it does is it causes you to think of what you do and how you fit in the world differently. And it's not, and it has universal application. People in the first year of people working at the fast food joint while they're in year 10, call them out when they do it, call the brain surgeons out when they do it.
Amazing. I'm pretty sure you've done that to me a couple of times. Yeah, that's great. I actually think that's a brilliant note to close up the panel. We do want a decent amount of time for networking afterwards, and all of our panellists will be there for your questions. But yeah, I think it's now my job as moderator to thank our brilliant panellists for their amazing contributions. I'd like to hand over to Peter to close us off for today. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, and I'd just like to reiterate that thanks from the bottom of my heart. I think that was such an extraordinary panel, and it's patently obvious to us all exactly why you've all soared to the heights that you've achieved, and thank you for so generously and openly sharing your experiences. I'm sure we've all taken things away, men and women alike. I think the other thing to emphasise is that advancement of women is not just an issue for women, it's an issue for men just as importantly as it is for women. And I think that we are acutely reminded of that in our current geopolitical times around the tremendous cost of a bias in leadership that overstates the value of powerful men. And hopefully we have some brighter times ahead of us with some more women leadership. So thank you all very much for coming. We'll adjourn to some networking and refreshments in the foyer. Thank you.